Hello, my creative friends. It's time to take another little art break, and this little hen has it all. She's got the sweetest little whimsical nature to her, plus a little dash of folk art with the color that she was painted in, plus all the little patterns that are on her dress. I'm going to first start out by giving you some tips about drawing and using a light box, and then I'm going to be showing you some things to consider if you want to put your painting inside of a frame. Of course, I'm going to walk you step by step for all the watercolor steps, and then adding all the little whimsical bits at the end to show you how to bring the extra character to this little hen. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to show you how you can begin to paint this sweet little whimsical red hen. I wanted to demo real quickly how you can use the tracers. I like using a light box, but you could use a window too. Once you print off your tracer on your printer, then go ahead and lay it on top of your light box. Then you can lay your watercolor paper down. Then you can go ahead and just use a regular pencil, trace along your image, and then you'll have your image traced and you'll be ready to go. And if you want to lighten your marks at all, you can easily use a gum eraser and then go over your pencil marks, and that will lift the graphite, but it's not going to smear it around on your paper like a regular eraser would do. This will just pick up the graphite and you'll have a light image underneath there, and you'll be ready to do your watercolors. I want to give one more tip. This drawing is made for a 5x7 frame, but there's always this ridge in here that holds your paper in. So you need to figure that when you're doing your calculation of where to put your tracer or where to put your drawing. You're going to want to trace around the inside of your paper first and then center it down, so then you can go ahead and line it up to figure out where you want to put your painting. That will really help so you don't get any of it underneath the inside of your frame. A very helpful thing to do before you start a watercolor painting is to choose the color palette you're going to use. Watercolor is a translucent medium, so it's very hard to change your colors once you lay them down. I'm choosing very much kind of a folk art color pattern, so I'm going to be using those colors of the turquoise, the reds, a little bit of rust, and of course some yellow for my little chicks, and a little bit of dash of green in there too. So I've already selected my color palette and I'm going to begin the painting process. With watercolor, you always start with your lightest tone of color, usually mixed to about tea consistency, no thicker than coffee. This is going to allow you to build up your color. Now this red I'm using is a cad red, and it's going to fade a lot lighter. So what you're seeing now is the wet color version of this color, but as it dries, it's going to become lighter, and I'm going to need to add additional layers onto my little red hen. It's always best to work in layers. If you go too quick, too dark, too fast, you're going to end up more with a very flat looking color, and you want to be able to see some of the layers that you put on. So I'm basically just working around this little chick face here, and I'm doing it very much like a color book style. I want my color to stay in the areas that I only want red. So the beak is going to be a different color, and so is her little wattles that are on the side of it, her face. I think they're called wattles. I'm not for sure. I think the comb is on the top. The wattle is around her nose. I want those to leave the paper area white because they're going to be different colors than red, and the red underneath will affect what I'm putting on the top. So I'm basically going to go around and paint all of the red areas first, and then I'll start in another area. Having this size of brush, it's a number 6 round. It's the Princeton Velvet Touch brush line. I like using these for a watercolor brush. They have a nice pointed end. The end will bounce back and keep a nice point. I've used this brush for a very long time. So I do have some links inside of the description box for some of the things I use. So if you're interested in checking them out, you can just find them in the description box. Well, let's continue on and I'll go to the next area. The next area I need to choose to paint is an area that doesn't touch the red of the chicken at all that I just painted. Watercolor always wants to flow where your paper is wet, so I want to make sure that the red stays red and it doesn't turn into any other color, so I want to choose an area that doesn't touch the red. I'm going to be working a little bit on the little chick off to the side. For the little chick, I'm basically tapping in a bright shade of yellow, and while that yellow is still wet, I'm going to be picking up just a tiny bit of my orange and tapping in some little orange highlights here and there. Brightness of that color of orange. I can mix my two colors. You can kind of see how I have a little bit of orange, a little bit of burnt sienna in there too, and I'm going to be tapping that color around the belly and just a little bit around the wings and just here and there. And because the yellow is wet, any colors that I put on top will mix together. So I'm going to get a little watercolor magic is what I like to call it. The colors will just mix and combine on their own, and I don't have to do a lot. I'm working on the Canson brand watercolor paper. It's a 140-pound watercolor paper. It's considered a student grade, so it's going to dry a lot quicker than 100% cotton watercolor paper. So my chicken has had plenty of time to dry, so I'm going to go up and start working on her hat. I'm basically going to be using the same colors that I used for my little chick down below for her hat. Some areas to pay attention when you're painting this hat is that underneath, because the brim goes across her forehead, those underneath areas need to be darker than that top little brim. That way it'll look like it's in shadow and it'll give some depth of that it's underneath. So that little top area of her hat, the little hat part that fits inside of over her head, that will have a bright area at the top. The rim will have some highlights there, but underneath it'll be darker. On this stage, it kind of all looks similar, but in the end, I'll have a darker shadow there. The little chick has had a little bit of time to dry. That yellow has very much lightened. I'm going to go back in with those same colors and add another layer. The red has dried, and hopefully you can see how it's really kind of lightened as it's dried. I'm going to be adding another layer on. It's not going to be mixed any thicker than coffee still. I'm just adding the next layer on and building my layers slowly so I don't end up with too much of a muddy, darkened look at the end. I'm putting it on the same way as before. I'm trying to avoid around the eyes, around her beak, and around those little wattles onto the side. I still want to leave those white if I can. After brushing in mostly red, I'm going to take a little bit of my red and mix a little bit of burnt sienna in there just to add a little bit more shadow. So underneath the comb area on the top of her head, I'm going to add just a little shadow there and a little shadow down below and off to the side of her face. Now, because my red is already wet inside of those areas, that color will just naturally blend and I'll get just a soft little shadow look on my hen. I'm going to do that same look for the rest of the red areas. Because my little hen is still wet, I'm going to move on and do a little bit of the turquoise color that I had mixed up from using a blue and an emerald green together to create my shade of turquoise. I'm going to be using that on the butterfly up above, on the flower on her hat, and then I'm going to be adding that pretty blue on her dress. I gave my paper a dry using my heat tool and dried it completely so I could take a look at what my reds look like all the way dry. I decided I wanted to add a little bit more color, so I'm adding a third layer onto my hen. This time I'm adding just a tiny bit more of that rust color, making sure I'm kind of tapping it in a direction of that feathers would grow in some areas and adding a few more shadows underneath the comb off to the side of the face. I'm going to give my paper a dry before I start the turquoise on her dress. Once it's all dry, I'm going to be layering that turquoise color in the same way I did with the red. I'm starting with a color that's about the consistency of coffee, and I'm putting it all over the areas of the dress that I want to be turquoise. Any of the other areas that I'm going to be painting a different color, I'm going to be leaving those areas white, just like I had done up above with the little chicken. It's a color book style of painting, just tapping in that color. When putting my paintings together, I do like to spread the colors around, so I have some of that turquoise up high on my butterfly, on her hat, and on her dress, and I decided I would make the egg in her basket the same color, just to move that paint color around my painting, which moves your eye all the way throughout. Something to keep in mind when you're choosing your colors, is there another place you can put them so your eye can travel easily around your painting? The next little splashes of color I'm going to be working with is that bright color of orange. So the wattle on my little hen is going to be orange. I painted the little beak on the little chick down below. It's going to be orange. I'm using that same orange that I'm mixing off to the side there for her feet as well. Again, I'm just kind of spreading that color around in 3 different areas. I'm using that same pool of color off to the right-hand side. This time it's slightly a little bit more yellow, and that's going to be the color of her beak. Now that the hat is dry, I can start laying in those darker colors that I need for the shadow. Right here, I'm putting it right underneath of the hat. This needs to be darker so it has that feel that I'm looking up and under her hat. I'm going to use a little bit of that shadow color on the little part of the hat that fits inside of the head. It's going to be darker there as well. I want the brim that's on the outside to be the lightest shade of paint. Is going to be that brim that goes across the front of the little chick's head. For the basket that she's hanging on to, I will be using the same colors that I used for her hat and on the chick around that basket area. It does have polka dots on it, and I want to leave those white, so I'm going to be painting around it. For the inside of the basket, it is drawn, so it looks like there's an inside. That little tiny area on each side of the egg needs to be slightly darker, so it looks like it's a shadow going inside of the basket. I used my heat tool and I dried that blue paint to make sure it was completely dry before I added the little accents of red on the inside of her dress. The accent areas are going to be the red rose in the middle, the polka dots on her dress, and I'm going to be doing some red polka dots on the basket as well. The little bright shades of pops of green is a complementary color to the little red hen. I'm going to be adding that bright shade of green at the collar and at the center of her dress. I'll be using that too for the leaves for the flowers as well as for the one that's on her hat. And I'm going to be brushing a little layer of it around the pocket to add just a little bit more of a trim piece around that shape. To add a tiny shadow to the white ruffle of her dress at the bottom, I took some of the black color I have in my set and I watered it down just to almost clear water with just a tiny bit of the black, and that added just a nice little shadow around that little white area. At this stage, the green had dried, so I needed to go in and add a little bit more darker areas for my green. I'm trying to add just the tiniest bit of highlight here and there with that bright shade of green from the first layer, but I'm tapping in a little bit more here and there to add a shadow. And then for the beak and the wattle areas, I'm just adding the tiniest bit of shadow line there as well. I'm mixing some of my colors together, adding a little bit of the red, some of the burnt sienna color, that brownish red color, and just using that for a shadow color. That's the great thing about watercolor. You can mix and add whatever you might have in your palette and come up with the color layers that you need. You don't have to feel that you have to have the individual colors. You can mix your own off to the side and come up with something that works. To create the grass line and to anchor the little chick and the hen to the ground, I took some of the green I had used up above and brushed it on horizontally. The darkest grass area will be in the back, so you could add a little bit darker green back there, and then you can add little tufts of dark green here and there as well. In the end, I'm going to be adding some line work with my micron pen, so this is just a nice little washed in green area. My polka dots have pretty much dried, so I'm going to add another little coat of color on there just to make them a little bit more brighter shade of red. I take one more look at the turquoise areas and see if I need to add any more darker shadows, and I'm going to add some to the egg, a little bit more on the flower and the butterfly, and I decided to make the inside of the pocket the same color as her dress, but I was going to be adding a plaid detail inside to give the pocket a little bit more interest. Now to decide on what to add for the background, and I decided to do more of a natural brown tone background. So I chose some browns, mixed them together, and then applied them to the background. I was going for a light shade of this darker brown, so I'm basically adding a wash of color to the background that's mixed to about tea consistency. I'm going to let that all dry and see if I need another layer. I did decide to add another layer of this color to the background. This time I was going to have the darkest shade of brown towards the top and then gradually get lighter as I move down to the green grass area. The watercolor steps are almost complete on this painting. I'm going to be adding just a few little details by using the same color of turquoise that I had already used on her dress, but I'm going to paint a pattern inside of that pocket. I'm going to add a little bit more shadowing to the egg and take a look at any other areas that might need to add a little bit more touch of color. We're just about done at this point, and we're going to be rolling right into adding all the final details using my pens. The micron nib size I'm going to be using is 001. I like using that size in these small little paintings. The Canson paper is fairly smooth, so it works well with the pens and the color pencil techniques that I'll be showing you. Micron pens also have the advantage of being a permanent ink once it's dry. So if you decide to use a spray varnish over top of your painting, like a matte varnish, a couple coats of that works well to go ahead and seal your watercolor painting in, or you can actually wax it too to seal it in, and the micron pens won't move around once it's dry. So it's a great pen to use when you need to perhaps use additional layers over top your watercolor painting. I'm going to be using that to color in my eyes. I like using a little bit of a scribble when I do that, trying to scribble in the black, but then just leave a white catch light on each side of the eye. If you put a catch light on the right side of your eye on one eye, you need to put it on the right side of the other eye. That way your eyes will look balanced and they won't have that little wonky look to them. For the outlines, I'm doing very much a hand sketch look to it. I'm stopping and starting and doing irregular lines. I'm not trying to copy my painting like perfect, like a color book painting. I'm more of doing loose sketchwork, handwork using my pen. On the hat, I did add a little bit different type of line work underneath the hat to give it more of that feeling of that the hat was going around. I made little hand gestures of going in kind of half circles. That way the hat will have that feeling of that it's contouring around. So when you're doing those little lines on the hat, you kind of want to put them in the direction of what and how the hat might be formed. Adding all the whimsical bits is a chance to bring your little character to life, even adding a little bit more character with all those little loose lines and gestures of drawing and painting. I love this style. It may not be yours, and if it isn't, you don't have to put all those extra lines in. But if you do, experiment and try and see what you come up with. If you watched me before, you know I love using a little bit of color pencil as well as that white China marker to add some little color detail on top as well. The China marker pencil has just more of a waxy look to it, almost like a crayon. And I find color pencils just a wonderful way to add another layer of texture and color to my watercolors. My favorite color pencils to use are the Prisma Premier line. I have a link inside of the description. The wax and the colors inside of these are nice and creamy, and there's so many colors to choose from. All the detail work is finished, so I'm going to be taking off my tape. The tape I used for this was the Scotch brand Magic Tape. It works great for holding your paintings down. Just make sure you put it on your clothes first to get a little of the stickiness off before you put it on your paper. Since I used my tracer, I traced out 2 drawings right away. I used one to create one version and then used the other to create a different version. Well, let's take a look and see what this little hen looks like sitting amongst some of my other spring things I've done so far on my channel. Spring has sprung inside of the studio. So many different whimsical characters we've already created together. If you enjoyed watching this little hen tutorial, you might want to check out this playlist with so many whimsical characters to choose from. If you like doing art and crafts and you're new to my channel, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.